this is doubtless something in my DNA, but part comes from the remarkable upbringing I was lucky enough to have. However you get there, it doesn't matter if it's nature or nurture, you have to be different. Disruptors are very different. They think differently, act differently, and their skill sets often don't fit with convention. And that's precisely where their power comes from. That's what allows them to win. I was born into the restaurant business. The story starts with my grandfather, Nick, who immigrated to the United States back in the 1890s. My granduncle, Paul, had partnered with a man named Chris Pappas, as well as his brothers Sam and Jimmy. My grandfather, Nick, joined them in 1910. Times were hard in the old days, and it was a very different world. Grandpa Nick had to change his last name from Morfogenus to Morfogen just to get a lease. Nobody would rent him space for his restaurant if he had an exotic Mediterranean-sounding name. But with one that might be Anglo-Saxon, there was a chance it could happen. Despite the prejudices of the day, Nick and the rest of the family grew the restaurant, Pappas, into a success. Politicians, celebrities, and industrialists came to eat there. Through their blood, sweat, and hard work, Pappas remained successful and profitable. It was one of the places to see and be seen in New York City until about 1960. The Morfogens were quick to assimilate and also to assert that they were just as American as anyone else. My family members served food to every U.S. president from the 1920s through the 1950s, and I'm proud to say I've personally served Clinton, Obama, Trump, and Al Gore. John, my father, started working for my grandfather when he was just 11 years old, right at the start of the Second World War. My father had been living in Sparta, in a town called Anavridi, up in the mountains. Despite its remote location, it was known as the place where more Nazis were killed than in any other part of Greece. By the tender age of 11, my father had already seen horrible atrocities of all sorts. The occupying Nazis had a policy whereby they'd execute 10 civilians for every one of their own who was killed. It was a grim existence, even for children. My father could recall hiding underneath horse and cow manure with his 5 siblings and my grandmother to save themselves from these Nazi selections. When he got to the States, my father started off by delivering groceries and vegetables. Then he was eventually brought into work inside the restaurant at Pappas. One by one, his other siblings from Greece were brought over to join him in the United States. By the late 40s, they all had successfully made the voyage. At Pappas, my father learned the ins and outs of the restaurant business through his Uncle Paul. It was Paul Morfogen who was the first to really master how the business worked. My father worked for about 10 years with Paul at Pappas. Then, in 1956, he ventured out on his own, opening his first restaurant, the Chelsea Chop House, on 8th Avenue at 23rd Street in Manhattan. He did this with $8,000 he'd saved from working at Pappas. That would be about $75,000 today. Chelsea Chop House did pretty well from the start. Not gangbusters, but not too bad either. It was moving along, getting by. But then, something important happened. A disruption. My family's first major disruption in the restaurant industry. It would not be the last. Back in those days, most restaurant workers had to be unionized. Organizations like the Hotel Employees and Restaurant Employees Union, here, were dominant in New York and boasted thousands of members. Unsatisfied with the work he was getting from his union employees at Chelsea Chop House, my father did the unthinkable and simply fired them. At the time, he was told by his peers, "You can't do that. They're union. There'll be consequences." My father did it anyway. He replaced the union workers with members of his own family, nephews, cousins, uncles, and so forth. My father realized that he could disrupt the system and accept the consequences. Everyone had warned him of the dangers of de-unionizing his restaurants, but my father understood there would be benefits as well, and he was willing to take that risk. What followed were massive protests and union pickets outside of Chelsea Chop House.